Welcome back to Built from Nothing, the channel where we share the real stories of grit, struggle, and triumph. Before we dive in, I want to hear from you. What's the toughest job you've ever had to do? Drop it in the comments below. You'll see why that question matters in just a moment. Because today we're talking about a man who worked 3 jobs at once, scrubbing toilets, pumping gas, and serving coffee, before he built a fashion empire worth billions. This is the story of Do Won Chang, the janitor who became a billionaire. Picture this. It's Los Angeles in the early 1980s. The sun is beating down on cracked sidewalks. Cars roar through endless traffic, and a young immigrant man is running from job to job just to keep the lights on. By morning, he's scrubbing toilets and wiping floors. By midday, he's pumping gas for strangers, smelling of exhaust and oil. By night, he's behind a coffee counter, smiling politely as customers sip lattes he could barely afford for himself. That man's name? Do Won Chang. He didn't speak much English. He had no college degree. He had no connections, no safety net, no silver spoon. All he had was grit. And yet, from those exhausting shifts, he built a fashion empire worth over $4 billion. The brand we know as Forever 21. This is not just the story of a businessman. This is the story of how one immigrant couple, armed with faith, vision, and relentless work, turned back-breaking labor into a global legacy. Do Won Chang was born in 1954 in South Korea. His early life wasn't luxurious, but it was disciplined. He came from a modest working-class family where you didn't ask for much and you worked for everything. Like many Koreans of his generation, his youth was marked by scarcity and resilience. In his 20s, he married Jin Sook, a woman whose strength and loyalty would later prove just as vital to their success as his ambition. Together, they dreamed of a better life. By the late 1970s, South Korea was still rebuilding from decades of war and poverty. Opportunities were limited. America, however, loomed in the distance like a shining promise, the land of freedom, of possibility, of second chances. In 1981, Do Won and Jin Sook took the leap. They packed up their lives and immigrated to Los Angeles, California. But when they landed, the American dream wasn't waiting with open arms. It was more like a locked door with a broken key. They had barely $5,000 in savings. They had no house, no car, and little understanding of English. The only thing they did have was each other. And so, survival became the priority. To pay rent and put food on the table, Do Won threw himself into work. Not one job, not 2 jobs, but 3 jobs simultaneously. In the mornings, he scrubbed offices and toilets as a janitor. During the day, he pumped gas at a filling station, inhaling fumes and working long hours under the California sun. At night, he took shifts at a local coffee shop, serving customers until closing. He barely slept. His hands were rough, his body exhausted, and yet he kept going. But it wasn't just exhaustion. It was humiliation. Imagine being a man in your late 20s, married, responsible for building a future, and you're scrubbing someone else's bathroom. Do Won endured it all because he knew one thing. This was temporary. One day, while working at the gas station, something clicked. As he pumped gas, he began to notice patterns. The customers who drove the nicest cars, Mercedes, BMWs, Cadillacs, they weren't doctors. They weren't lawyers. They weren't professors. They were in the fashion business. That realization burned into his mind. Fashion. That's where the money was. That's where possibility lived. Now remember, Do Won wasn't a designer. He didn't go to business school, he wasn't part of high society. But he had two things: an unstoppable work ethic and a keen eye for opportunity. He began to dream of opening a clothing store, something small, something affordable, something that would cater to people like him and his community, hard-working immigrants who wanted to look stylish without spending a fortune. It seemed impossible. But then again, his whole life had been built on doing the impossible. In 1984, just 3 years after arriving in the U.S., Do Won and Jin Sook scraped together enough savings to rent a tiny 900-square-foot shop in Los Angeles. They named it Fashion 21. The store wasn't fancy, the racks weren't polished, the mannequins weren't high-end, but the energy was electric. On opening day, they made $700 in sales. By the end of their first year, they had earned $700,000. Let that sink in. From cleaning bathrooms and pumping gas to nearly $1 million in sales in just 12 months, it was the beginning of something massive. Fashion 21 was small, but it was different. Do Won and Jin Sook didn't just stock clothes, they stocked dreams people could afford. In 1984, Los Angeles, malls were filled with brands that were either too expensive for working families or too bland for the younger generation. Fashion 21 carved out a new lane. Trendy, affordable, fast-changing styles that spoke directly to immigrants, teens, and young adults who wanted to feel fashionable without emptying their wallets. Do Won's approach was bold. He didn't believe in slow fashion cycles. He would travel to downtown LA's garment district, buy wholesale, and rotate inventory constantly. Customers who came in 1 week would find entirely new racks the next. It was revolutionary. Every visit to Fashion 21 felt urgent. If you didn't buy today, that outfit might be gone tomorrow. Within a year, the store exploded with popularity. What started as a modest storefront became a beacon for bargain-hunting fashion lovers across the city. Do Won and Jin Sook realized they had struck gold, but instead of stopping there, they doubled down. By 1987, expansion was inevitable. They rebranded from Fashion 21 to Forever 21. The new name carried a promise, youth, vitality, and the idea that you could look stylish forever, no matter your age or budget. It wasn't just a clothing store, it was an identity. Forever 21's formula was genius in its simplicity, constantly updated inventory, low prices that undercut competitors, big, bright stores that felt aspirational but still approachable. Their second store opened, then a third, then a fourth. By the early 1990s, Forever 21 was no longer just a local LA secret. It was spreading like wildfire across the United States. Behind the glitter of expanding stores, the grind never stopped. Employees recalled how Do Won would personally unload boxes, set up racks, and sweep floors, even as the company grew. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He and Jin Sook worked 14-hour days, rarely taking breaks. Jin Sook, who managed much of the buying, was known to work overnight, choosing fabrics and styles that would appeal to their young customers. The couple was so frugal that for years they lived simply, pouring almost every dollar back into the business. Their strategy was clear: build fast, expand wide, and own the market. By the 2000s, Forever 21 was everywhere. The stores weren't small boutiques anymore. They were massive, multi-story flagships in prime mall locations. Forever 21 bags, with their bold yellow branding, became status symbols for teenagers and young adults. In 2001, they opened a 24,000 square foot flagship store in Miami. In 2009, they debuted their flagship in Times Square, New York City, one of the most expensive retail locations in the world. That store alone reportedly generated hundreds of millions in annual sales. Forever 21 had become a cultural force. It wasn't just a store where people shopped. It was where they went for self-expression. Teenagers uploaded haul videos on YouTube. Influencers flaunted their Forever 21 outfits on Instagram. Young couples made weekend trips to malls just to browse the latest collections. At its peak, Forever 21 had more than 800 stores in over 40 countries and generated over $4.4 billion in annual revenue. Let's pause here. Think about it. Less than 20 years after arriving in America with almost no money, barely speaking English, and working 3 jobs to survive, Do Won and Jin Sook Chang had built one of the largest privately owned fashion retailers in the world. They were billionaires. Their daughters joined the business. Their name was known globally. For millions of immigrants and strivers, their story wasn't just inspiring, it was proof. Proof that you could come from nothing, that you could overcome language barriers, cultural hurdles, and financial obstacles, and still build something extraordinary. Forever 21 wasn't just a brand. It was a statement. The American dream was alive. As the empire expanded, cracks began to form. Behind the glossy storefronts, Forever 21 faced mounting challenges. Critics accused the brand of overworking staff in the supply chain. Rivals like H&M and Zara were innovating faster with more efficient systems. The rise of online shopping began to pull younger consumers away from malls. The very formula that made Forever 21 successful, rapid expansion, cheap prices, constant churn, was also laying the seeds of risk. But for now, in the late 2000s and early 2010, the brand stood tall, forever. 21 was at its zenith, and the Chang family had climbed from janitorial closets and gas station fumes to the glittering penthouses of billionaire life. The janitor had become a king of fashion. For more than 2 decades, Forever 21 dominated malls, fed teen fashion, and printed billions in sales. But no empire stays untouchable forever. By the mid-2000s teens, subtle cracks started to widen. The Changs had always believed in physical stores, the experience of browsing racks, trying clothes, leaving with a yellow shopping bag in hand. But the world was shifting. Young consumers were no longer flocking to malls. They were opening apps, shopping on their phones, ordering directly from websites that shipped trendy outfits to their doors within days. And the competition? Fierce. H&M, Zara, and new online players like ASOS and Fashion Nova were innovating faster. They didn't just mimic trends, they dictated them. Forever 21, meanwhile, kept expanding into more giant brick-and-mortar stores, betting on a retail model that was already beginning to fade. At its peak, Forever 21 had nearly 800 stores worldwide, but many of these locations were enormous, 30,000 to 50,000 square feet each, the kind of real estate that cost millions per year just to maintain. On paper, expansion seemed like growth. In reality, it was a gamble. The company stretched itself too thin. Profits shrank, inventory piled up, and as mall traffic slowed, those gigantic flagship stores began to feel less like assets and more like anchors, dragging the company down. Even as warnings piled up, Forever 21 pressed forward. Their vision of being everywhere blinded them to the reality that consumers were moving online. There were other challenges too. The brand, once beloved by teens, started to lose its shine. Critics began associating Forever 21 with fast fashion, cheap, disposable clothes that came with ethical and environmental baggage. Stories surfaced about labor conditions in parts of their supply chain. Designers accused the brand of copying styles. Shoppers complained about quality. The cultural zeitgeist was turning. What once felt fun and accessible now felt careless and outdated. And yet, even in the face of these mounting issues, Do Won and Jin Sook refused to quit. They were fighters, survivors. They had built their empire from nothing, and they weren't about to let it crumble without a fight. But by 2019, the pressure was undeniable. Forever 21 officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was a stunning fall. A company once valued in the billions was suddenly closing hundreds of stores, laying off thousands of employees, and struggling to find footing in a world that had moved on. Headlines were brutal. Forever 21, forever no more. The fast fashion giant that grew too fast. From billions to bankruptcy. For Do Won and Jin Sook, it must have felt like reliving those early days in Los Angeles when survival seemed uncertain. Except this time, they weren't scrubbing toilets or pumping gas. They were fighting to hold onto a legacy. Behind the financial headlines, there was a deeper human story. The Changs had poured everything into Forever 21. Their identities were bound to it. Their daughters, Linda and Esther, had taken executive roles in the company. This wasn't just a business. It was a family dream. And when the company fell, it wasn't just about numbers. It was about pride, sacrifice, and the crushing weight of watching something you built from scratch collapse. For immigrants who had worked 3 jobs just to survive, the irony must have been painful. To fight your way out of poverty, only to be brought down by overexpansion and shifting consumer habits. And yet even bankruptcy wasn't the end. In early 2020, Forever 21 found new life. A group of investors, including Authentic Brands Group, bought the company out of bankruptcy. The Changs no longer owned their empire outright, but they were still involved. Forever 21 stores remained open. The yellow bags were still spotted in malls. The brand wasn't dead. It was fighting for reinvention. And in a way, that's fitting. Because Do Won's entire story has never been about smooth sailing. It's always been about resilience, falling down, standing back up. Scrubbing toilets one day, running a billion-dollar company the next. Bankrupt one year, fighting for relevance the next. Forever 21's fall was dramatic. But to many, it wasn't just a cautionary tale about business decisions. It was a reminder. No success is permanent. Markets shift, tastes evolve, fortunes rise and fall. But for Do Won Chang, the immigrant janitor who built an empire, the legacy wasn't just in revenue charts or store counts. It was in proving that even the most ordinary beginnings can create extraordinary impact. When people look at the Forever 21 story, they often focus on the bankruptcy, the decline, the missed opportunities. But if you zoom out, the bigger story is extraordinary. Think about where it began. A young man in Los Angeles who could barely speak English, working 3 jobs just to make rent. He wasn't supposed to become a billionaire. He wasn't supposed to build one of the largest privately owned fashion retailers in the world. And yet, he did. That's the first lesson. Where you start does not define where you end up. Too often, people think their circumstances are permanent. that poverty is destiny, that lack of education or connections makes success impossible. Do Won proved that hard work, vision, and relentless persistence can rewrite the script. For years, Forever 21 thrived because it adapted quickly. Do Won and Jin Sook rotated inventory constantly, spotted trends early, and gave customers something they couldn't find elsewhere, style they could actually afford. But later, the company struggled precisely because it stopped adapting. It clung to malls when consumers were moving online. It doubled down on massive stores when leaner models were winning. The lesson? The same flexibility that creates success must also sustain it. You can't build an empire on yesterday's strategy. Behind the glossy storefronts and billion-dollar headlines, there were years of sacrifice. Do Won missed sleep. He worked 3 jobs until his body ached. He and Jin Sook lived frugally, reinvesting every dollar into the business. They risked everything for a dream that had no guarantee of working. It's easy to admire billionaires when they're standing on stage in designer suits. It's harder to remember that most great stories of wealth and impact are built on years of invisible struggle. The takeaway? Everyone wants the reward. Few are willing to pay the price. Perhaps the most important lesson is resilience. Because here's the truth. Even after building Forever 21 into a multi-billion-dollar empire, Do Won still faced failure. Bankruptcy humbled him. Critics mocked him. Competitors overtook him, but he didn't quit. He didn't disappear. He stayed involved. The man who once scrubbed toilets in Los Angeles refused to let a bankruptcy define him. That's resilience, and that's what makes this story so powerful. Today, Forever 21 is smaller than it once was. It isn't the cultural giant it was in the 2000s, but the brand lives on. The yellow bags still exist. The stores still open their doors, and millions of people around the world still wear clothes born from one immigrant family's dream. But perhaps the bigger legacy is invisible. It's in the immigrants who hear this story and believe that maybe, just maybe, they too can overcome language barriers, cultural hurdles, and financial hardship to build something remarkable. It's in the entrepreneurs who realize that failure doesn't mean the end, that even billion-dollar empires can crumble and rise again. It's in the everyday people who hear about a janitor who became a billionaire and realize that success is never about where you start. It's about how hard you're willing to climb. So, here's the question for you. What's your version of cleaning bathrooms, pumping gas, or serving coffee? What's the grind you're stuck in right now? The one that feels endless, thankless, hopeless? And more importantly, what empire could you build from it? Because Do Won Chang's story proves something most people forget. You don't need to be born rich. You don't need to be born connected. You don't even need to be born in the right country. You need a vision. You need relentless work ethic. And you need the courage to try, even when success feels impossible. From janitor to billionaire, from obscurity to global impact, from nothing to Forever 21. If this story inspired you, do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of grit, struggle, and triumph. And drop a comment below. What's your built-from-nothing dream? Because one day, the world may be telling your story.